Welcome to the Hospitality Maverick podcast with me, Michael Tingsher. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. Thanks to BizSimply for sponsoring this episode as our show partner. And BizSimply is the all-in-one HR, workforce management, rota and operations software designed and built by hospitality experts to make every shift run like clockwork. And we join forces to help the industry to find new ways to become even more innovative in how we lead our people, how we operate, to how we grow our businesses, to how we serve our customers. Together we want to share strategies and tools that can make the industry thrive long term, not just survive.
Exceptional performance is a product of talent that gets cultivated, right? You don't just rest on the talent that's in the role. That's where somebody who has the right talent and you throw investment of skill, knowledge, and experience, they gain that and they hold it and they use it masterfully. I would tell you that preparation on a miscast situation reveals the fact that the person lacks the talent because their investment in preparation doesn't stick. And one of the clues to talent is the rapid learning with near perfection in the retention. Can they take a learning? This is where when you have a talented person and you coach them, they keep flying. They take off. They go to new bounds.
This is Dave Oakley, CEO of Lead Different, a consultancy that coaches leaders and organizations on how to use the great work of Jim Collins to go from good to great. And I love when I have a guest come back to the show because the conversation just gets stronger and better. And last time Dave was on the show, we dived into the concept of first who, then what, from the famous book Good to Great, also by Jim Collins. And our vision for this conversation was to go a bit deeper to help leaders to get some practical tools to help them manage one of their biggest challenges right now, attracting and retaining their talent. And Dave takes us on a journey on how we can get talent right by using the talent matrix and what we can do to build a great company by mastering the who before anything else. Before you tune in, please sign up for a weekly newsletter, Maverick Talk, which is packed with more Maverick insight, strategies and tools. Find the link in the show notes or visit hospitalitymavericks.com. Now grab notebook. There are some super golden insights and nuggets in this conversation that will make you reflect on how you approach talent. Enjoy. I'm always excited when I get the opportunity to get people back on the show to talk about either an involvement of what we already discussed or something totally new. And I think we're going to have both things happening today, and we're going to be talking about this famous book I talk a lot about that's called Good to Great, which many leaders, as Dave said, that's back at the show just before we start, like many CEOs or people who have been on MBA programs or any other kind of leadership training through their life have been reading this book. And then they get to this space of, wilderness where they say, yeah, I really want to do this. I really want to face the brutal facts. I really want to get the right people on the bus. I really want to do level 5 leadership. But how? How the hell do I actually take this to practical application in the real world? And then there was another interesting part that we actually, because we came back from our previous conversation where we talked about first who, then what. And I think we're doing an extension of this today, but I think we're doing it under the umbrella. And that's what I was just talking with Dave about before we started, was that there's really all this, crazy uncertainty going on. And it's just like one layer after the other. It's not even by quarter or by months. It's by day, depending on what industry you're in. There's these things happening that's totally out of your control. But actually, how do you actually have an organization that is ready for that? And many of these good to great company, they almost thrived in uncertainty. And they became stronger as they came out of that. And it was not just once, it was twice, it was decades of challenge they went through. So we're probably also going to touch a bit on that because I think that's really relevant compared to what's going on in the world. With that long intro, welcome back to the show, Dave. It's absolutely incredible to have you back here to discuss good to great, and also the wider work of Jim Collins and Morten Hansen, for that sake.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be back on your podcast. And obviously, as you mentioned, these principles, these challenges that all leaders are facing, they haven't gotten easier, and they won't over time. So how do we take the learning that Collins and his researchers developed for us in this whole body of work, and how do we put it into practice? There's a little bit of staring into the fog. Like you said, the leaders that I meet identify with the principles. Sometimes they try to piecemeal them. They don't know how to thread them all together or know where to start. How do you cultivate level 5 leadership? How do you first who? This is really the mission that I've been on since I started reading it, because I had those questions myself. I was, leading a pretty large business that needed to improve, and we connected with the principles, but then we said, okay, how do we do this? And we started to put together puzzle pieces, and that's really what's evolved into my practice today. I do that full time, and it's grown into being a combination of working with leadership teams in that sort of context. But it's evolved a lot, as we were talking about earlier, into a lot of people seeking me out for leadership coaching. There's a lot of leaders that go, how do I cultivate my potential to become a level 5 so that we can navigate all this turbulence and establish a great company, great organization?
Yeah, and that's super interesting that actually people has been reaching out to you, because you have done something that I think that's really incredible. You have actually, hacked some of these principles, you can say, because there's a lot of research behind the proof them. But what you have found is practical tools to do this. And it would be interesting, just from last time we talked a bit about, first who then what, maybe just to recap your own understanding of first who then what, and then also about why lots of people want to talk specifically about that. And then we're also going to be talking about you created something called the talent matrix you use in your practice.
I would say that, again, Collins and his team came up with these brilliant findings, and you'll see reference in all the works where he'll talk about, well, there's black boxes that they cracked open to answer the big question, can a good company become great? If so, how? They left behind a lot of black boxes, like how to cultivate level 5 leadership. How do I practice first who? That's really been my mission, is to crack open those black boxes and create an actionable path. And we'll talk, like you said, the talent matrix is such an important cornerstone of how we teach people to apply first who. But first, the idea that who questions come first is something that a leader has to really come to grips with, because the way to have a great company is to make sure that you have those right people in the right seats, where the organization doesn't need tight management. Because with the right people in the right seats, you can have freedom and responsibility. The organization can be faster. More things happen at the point of attack. There's a better chance to surface and resolve difficult issues. All these things that are so important to performing at a high level, getting results, and sustaining those. You mentioned earlier that dealing with setbacks and turbulence. Well, with the right people in the right seats, they're more apt to raise those issues very, very quickly, and not only raise the flag, but have great answers. They may actually solve some of the most important issues before they even get to the top leader's desk. And that's the definition of having the right people, so that you can have the speed, right? When you settle on people and you don't hold a high standard to the right people, then you have to get into things like command and control and bureaucracy. And we all know that those are never the earmark of a company that's going to have great and lasting results, right? Nobody goes, oh boy, I want to go work there because it's really bureaucratic and it's tops down leadership. But yet we find ourselves in that because we haven't stayed disciplined as leaders to go, I'm going to hold out. I'm going to make sure that I have the right people in all the seats. High 90% is the benchmark that Collins sets for us to have the opportunity to be great. Right? You have to have 90% plus of the right people in the right seats. And almost everybody goes, oh, of course, I don't do anything but hire the right people. Here's the big distinction, and some people miss this when they read the book, is the right person is more about who they are than what they know. It's more about character traits and innate talents than it is knowledge, skill, and experience.
As you were saying that, I was almost thinking about, you said the word, a word I last couple of months become very interested in. It's called responsibility. I think a lot of companies I meet, and a lot of leaders I meet with, they almost feel like when they have delegated something, they don't have 100% responsibility for more. On the same employees that they have a job description means they don't have they have 100% responsibility for the job description, but not for the wider company in itself and its health. And actually, what's very interesting when you look at good to great companies, and also a piece of work we're doing at the moment, you see these, companies where, responsibility, as I call it, that word, or ownership, there's like an ownership culture. We all in it together, and we escalate challenges quicker. There's not like an ego that stands in the way. There's not a job description. We all in it together, and you can see there's this openness and transparency in the organization, and that's because they have been able to build a company, I guess, as you said, with 90% of the people that's on board at that present moment are the right people. So therefore they can have that openness, transparency. Some of them have total openness around numbers. It could be other things, but numbers is a very, common thing you see in these companies, that everybody knows the health the business are in.
Yeah, and I think it's important that to be able to get this right, the leader has to make the shift from saying the numbers are the most important thing and the thing that we focus on. And so the idea of discipline is putting discipline around making sure those things get accomplished versus going, if I get the right people in the right seats, they're already self-motivated. They're already exceptional fits to the task I've given them. So I don't have to micromanage them, and the results will come. Crossing that bridge to trust that is the way that great organizations work is foundational. So the idea of, if you want to have a great culture where you get the most out of the talent that you have, you got to look in the mirror as a leader and go, who's responsible for creating that kind of culture that can perform that way naturally without a lot of oversight, without just, accountability being this thing that we impose, or discipline being that we impose. The right people are self-disciplined. When you start settling and you get on a slippery slope where you're just trying to staff jobs and the leader loses their discipline, that's when your culture starts to get watered down and it starts to slow down, and your ability to get results it really gets compromised. So one of the things that's really dawned on me, Michael, as I've been working with so many leaders with these principles is, Collins has a lot of different concepts. I think there's something like 12 that he points out, and there's more than that. And people go, wow, there's so many different things that I need to master. I'll tell you, as I've studied more and more of them, almost all of them come right back to leadership discipline. Are you disciplined enough to hold out for the right people and find the right people, or find the way to get enough of the right people versus being undisciplined and settling for people, right? Are you disciplined enough to give people the direction and the support and focus on outcomes so that they have authority to act at the lowest level? That's a leadership discipline thing. And almost every principle you walk through, it comes back to, if you're able to do that, it's because the leadership is disciplined in their mindset, not that they impose discipline on the organization. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's a connection I've seen that threads through all of the principles.
But I think also that what you're saying there is, like, as a leader, the discipline the organization shows is the reflection of your discipline and how you practice it on yourself and keep people. Because what I've noticed in really great performing organization is they, like an example, I think this is a great example. They impose deadlines on things, but not on human deadlines. Because you can still raise a hand or red flag, as Jim Collins said. It's not possible for me to do this. I committed to something that's above what I can do right now. And there will be, of course, a way around that deadline, but they have deadlines on all things they work on, and they have this discipline around focusing really on the 20% that gives 80 all the time, really on the things that matters. So therefore they avoid, lots of times they avoid, they're not perfect, but burnouts, stress, working on projects that should never have been started, because they really try to define these things, definitely in the top of the leadership. What is the really that's going to make us look successful, and how does the future looks? So they have a very clear vision they often have created together with the staff. So they already know that this is the vision. It's communicated, it's been created in collab with them in some kind of way. And therefore, the discipline will be very high. And this is typical the leaders I see that's very disciplined. They're very disciplined with these, untangible leadership disciplines as they are. Vision, setting deadlines, coaching people, these things.
Yeah, I agree. And getting back to the right people, right? The ability to have that direction that you're talking about, Michael, come out of shared understanding. It's only possible, again, when you've gone to the trouble to have the right people in the right seats, right? That's when you're able to have the vision, or where we drive the bus, be a product of something that the leader does through leading with questions. Where should we drive this bus? It comes from reflecting and understanding, what the organization can be best at, what we're passionate about, right? And what drives our economic engine. When you have the right people, you can have that conversation intelligently, and the vision emerges from a shared understanding versus some brilliant idea of the leader. Because when the leader sets the direction out of their own ego or their own idea and not out of the shared, now we get into, I've got to convince everybody that this is the right way for the bus to go. And that's why so many of these great strategies or visions that leaders have, they struggle to get traction on them. Where again, go back and put who questions first. When I go to the trouble, get the right people in the right seats, and they feel responsible and empowered, or it's safe to bring up the big issues, we start dealing with those. We create this opportunity to say, wow, we can be great at these things. And these are the things that drive our economic engine. And this is what we're all passionate about. That's how this idea of a strategy called the hedgehog comes out of the necessity of having the right people in the right seats. Now, one of the things as I've been working with leaders on this idea of how do I evaluate my people, and what's the difference between right seat and right person, right? And for me, it boils down to the right seat is really the product of that talent, right? Does the work that you're assigning somebody of that seat, does it draw on that person's natural strengths? Are they, Olympic caliber fit to that seat? That's where the idea of we got to make sure we get tuned into talent versus knowledge, skill, and experience for the right seat. Now, when we talk about whether they belong on the bus or not, that's where character and values comes in. Right? These are two things, talent and character, that are, almost unchangeable in people, right? People don't change that much in these inherent areas. And so whether or not somebody belongs on your bus, regardless if they're uber talented, right, is a product of their character and their values. Do they bring something and, become a force multiplier on the culture that you want? Or do they detract from it, right? Big decisions that leaders struggle with all the time is having this uber talented high producer that is toxic, right? And we call that as we evaluate people in the talent matrix, that's a dilemma. Somebody who delivers exceptional results, but they're toxic, right? That person, if we can't be disciplined and give them that feedback and not accept that behavior as just the way we get the results, then that person won't ever respond to it. If we allow that person to stay in place, then our culture breaks down. It becomes, our core values don't mean anything. So if they don't respond in a favorable way, they don't get a seat on the bus. They have to go find a bus where those character traits and values, kind of match up. So again, that's a huge part of leadership discipline. Do you have the discipline to take, a dilemma high performer and manage that properly?
Yeah, I can remember because I really got that out of Good to Great as one of the third time I read this book as I was promoted in to be responsible for a whole organization, and therefore I was suddenly not. I was managing not a team per se. I was managing a group of leaders, and I had this very high performing GM of a place, and they were doing really, really well. There was nothing in the numbers you could complain about, but there was definitely, when you started talking with the staff, it was definitely not the way we saw a place. It was definitely top down, a ruler more than a coach, and I believe it was just about a tipping point where that would go really wrong, and we would have an exodus of great people, which would mean that that place would suddenly not be performing that well. And how do you confront, you've been just come into a job, and the two owners have put you in that job, and you tell them, the best performing place on numbers, we need to deal with that place because it's gonna crumble in a second. And first of all, convincing them about that and actually finding evidence for this is what we need to do is very hard. And I actually didn't stop it in time. It started actually to crack the house, but I knew what I needed to do. I needed to go in and put some ultimatums in place because I actually didn't believe that the person could change that quickly in behaviors, but I actually gave him an opportunity somewhere else where he could use his skill set. And it didn't go well because we got in too late, and you were working with a very toxic situation, and it took a long time to come back from and get this place back and trust back in that group of people who worked in that specific team and unit. So it's so key to get in straight away when you get that feeling of toxic leadership or a ruler / dictator kind of things going on, because it's just a question about time before the whole card house collapse.
Yeah, and that ability to have that kind of difficult conversation is really a core competence of great leaders, right? And often the higher up you get, the less anybody's really developed either that skill or the comfort or the knowledge that despite the fact that it's difficult, that I have to do that. I have to engage on that and then be disciplined. Think of all those dominoes that have to happen for it to happen in a timely manner, and for it to be done well and respectful and have a productive outcome. And that productive outcome is really just making clear to that person that despite their great results, or that site, despite the great results, that the behaviors are unacceptable and they need to be owned and changed, or there's a consequence, right? To be able to be that disciplined and go through that, there's a lot of technique that leaders have to develop to be able to have those kind of difficult conversations. And those same techniques are important for leaders to be able to establish the kind of culture that can have debate and dialogue that's not debate to win, that's debate and dialogue that you need to be able to get to a productive and aligned outcome, shared understanding out of places where we violently disagree. That's a leadership competence that is essential for a company to navigate all this turbulence that we've been talking about. But it definitely, when we talk about first who, being able to not only recognize that dilemma has to be dealt with, but then to do it effectively is critical. And that's where I spend a lot of time with leaders, because there's just so few have had, any kind of training or any kind of reps on how to do that. And so they tend to either avoid them or they handle them poorly. And neither one of those is a good outcome. So.
Yeah, and I think especially in these times where, there's so much else going on. We talked about the uncertainty in the world, or just in business, but also in people's lives. The start, it's a huge impact on people's lives. So therefore, being able to manage these situations and being able to actually, be ready for having difficult conversation, but they will come as people get frazzled, and you cannot just turn up as a machine at work and leave all the human stuff on the other side. It could also be that you need to help them navigate through, or help to take a bit off their plate, or maybe they need to get stretched a bit more, so you put more on their plates. One of the things I really, as we were preparing for this, and one of the things I really think I got right in the end when I was starting rolling out the practice of good to great was like finding the right people. The whole hiring and recruitment setup we talked about last time. How do you look for the right traits, values? It's not skills you're looking for. You can train for skills. Was that kind of thing where it was a bit more, wilderness for me. How do I actually already with the existing people I have, if I can't promote them, how do I actually get the best potential and performance out of them? And how do I have these conversations with them without making them believe there's not a future for them? Because sometimes there's just not, it's not always just about progressing. It's also developing in your current role. But often what you see is that people are so focused on these moves they can make in an organization in up to a new role that has a new title, but instead of thinking about actually how can I actually become better at what I'm doing.
Yeah, there's a lot in that point, Michael, that first two can leave you with the impression that I get the right people on the bus, the right people in the right seats and the wrong people off, and then I'm done. First two is a full cycle. And you were ticking through that. It's not only getting the right people in the right seats, wrong people off. It's about how throughout their time with us do I develop them and make sure that the conditions for all of my talent allow for the highest individual and collective success, right? That's when I'm leading, is when I can have the right talent and I unlock their full potential against the important things we need to do. And having the ability to have a set of routines and actually the mindset to do that and a way to do that is so critical. That's bringing first two to life. It's a full cycle process. And that's where, as my teams first got excited about good to great, and we instantly ran into first two and said, well, how do we get the right people? And now it's a matter of talent and character. How the heck do we do that? We've been doing knowledge, skill, and experience for so long. How do we get at the idea of talent and character? And this is where, through some trial and error and a lot of soul searching, we came up with this thing that we call the talent matrix now. And there's nothing, brilliant about the talent matrix when you look at it. But it's the understanding that it helps you create. It's the dialogue that it fosters through applying it. That's the magic. And so we took a talent matrix it's a 9-box grid that it's often used for succession planning, almost exclusively for leadership, where once a year the HR manager and the leaders of the organization get together and they put people in individual boxes to go who might be the best leaders for succession planning. And it's a once a year thing. Some people do it really well, but others sort of pencil whip it. And we said, there's a really interesting thing about these 9 boxes is that on the x-axis, there's sort of moving from low to high, there's performance, which is obviously important for us to understand. What are the results and outcomes that you want a person to have? And then on the y-axis, they always had low, medium, and high potential. We said, what is potential? And, again, these were always leadership focused. And we said, what if you took that, knowing that talent is role specific, right? That everybody has talent and they're going to get the best results by being in the right seat on the bus. And that every seat on the bus, right, benefits from having, exceptional fit in the talent. Then we've got to go, each of these talent matrices, you kind of develop role by role. So we started to look at that and go, how do we adapt this tool that's, used very infrequently and only for leadership? How do we put that where we can tease out this idea of fit? And that is something that we invested a lot of time in. And so we do this by, you take an individual role and you define and we contrast two groups of people. the high potential, the best we've ever seen. The talent matrix is about an absolute scale. We're not grading on a curve. We're looking for the best you've ever seen in that role. And it could be, half of Michael and half of Dave, right? Maybe it's some combination of the two of us. If you could put those together, wow, you'd have the best project manager in the history of project management, right? So we create that vision of that's a high potential. And then we also consider the opposite of that, which is in the lower left where performance is low and fit is low. We call that a miscast situation. Dave got promoted into a role he doesn't fit well, and he's just going to struggle to get average results, let alone be productive, right? Or excel. So we contrast those two and we say, okay, let's start with what are the performance results, the measurable results, and the outcomes that would define the greatest performance we've ever seen. And that sort of pins the corner of the hypo. And talent, then, well, what is the talent that leads to those kind of results? And, we looked at Myers-Briggs, at DISC, at Strengths Finders, and you talk about staring into the fog, going, is it a combination of tenacity and curiosity and woo that creates that result? I mean, there's no way to connect those dots. At least we couldn't figure it out. It seemed very abstract. And I forget who had the observation, but it was really, really clever to go, you recognize talent when you watch somebody. When you see, you recognize talent when somebody does their behavior is productively applied to something important and challenging, and they do it well. You go, that's talent. And so we started to go, let's take each of the results and outcomes and go, what are the behaviors you would observe the best doing that make them stand out to get these exceptional results? Call those enabling behaviors. So that's the proxy we use when we define a role and define a talent. And then on the flip side, think about it, the miscast, we have the poorer results or outcomes with their struggle, and we link that to limiting behaviors. And these always, Michael, they show up when people run into unscripted situations, right? Something that we couldn't boil down into a procedure, right? They're always going to happen. This is part of managing in a turbulent environment. Do I always have the person wait when they run into something they haven't seen? Well, the best know how to improv when they've not seen something and they get a stellar result. The miscast runs into the same improvisational moment and they do something cringeworthy, right? And that's the difference, right? And that's how we got to this place of get together, define a role, define a talent with defining the results and outcomes, and then understanding the behaviors that we're looking for. And now we can start to say, does somebody fit that seat at an exceptional level? Does that make sense? There's a lot to that.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, but what I really got is also like when you said impro, because we all know that feeling in our life when something happens that for other people would be an absolute catastrophe to manage or deal with a situation. It's your moment. You just grab that, you are in flow straight away, you know what to do, you know how to deal with the stakeholders, you know what questions to ask, you know what comes first, you very quickly get organized in your head what needs to happen. And I almost like it, and people say, well, it's a talent, but it's also what you worked on in your career, because I always believe you're never done, you're always preparing. You're never done. Even if you become the CEO or the chairman or whatever, you're just preparing for the next things that hit you, and you have to keep on training. And I think you said that, and I think Stephen R. Covey has a beautiful analogy of what do you call it? He called it strength. No, what do you call it? He called strength the saw, or he has some kind of analogy about that. If you want to chop down a tree, you have much better spend 7 hours on actually getting the saw sharp before you start cutting down the tree. And that's what these people do, I think. That's why they're talent, because they keep on stretching for that better. It doesn't mean they are top performing every day. So same like Olympic gold medals. How many times do they show up during their careers? Maybe 2 or 3 times and win a medal. But they are just preparing all the time. It's not about this crazy results all the time. It's actually about that preparation. That's talent, in my view, that you are constantly trying to get better. And of course you can master. the responsibility you're within, and you can get some above average results.
Yeah, I would add something to that, Michael, that may put a side spin on what you just said. The difference for me, because I do agree with you that exceptional performance is a product of talent that gets cultivated, right? That you don't just rest on the talent that's in the role. You actually keep working to build. That's where somebody who has the right talent and you throw investment of skill, knowledge, and experience, they gain that and they hold it and they use it masterfully. I would tell you that preparation on a miscast situation reveals the fact that the person lacks the talent because their investment in preparation doesn't stick, right? And one of the clues to talent is the rapid learning and with near perfection in the retention, right? Can they take a learning? This is where when you have a talented person and you coach them, they keep flying. They take off. They go to new bounds. Coaching a miscast, you get trapped in this cycle of I coach somebody to get an acceptable result, and then when the coaching's, when you step away, they start to fade. They can't sustain it. And then you coach the same thing, and you do it over and over again, and you find yourself investing time that doesn't have a great payoff. And that's a big clue to talent. And that's where, the idea again of let me promote the best engineer into the leadership role, and then coaching is going to fill that gap. If they don't have the requisite leadership talents, you'll coach and coach and coach them on the things that you need them to do and people skills and managing talent and getting performance out of people. And it will be frustrating for that individual. Their team will not thrive. And you're going to be investing that time over and over again in the same things. Where somebody who has that talent, you start giving them investments and they give you multiples on the return. I hope that makes sense. That's a big difference between somebody who's talented and somebody who maybe doesn't fit that role as well.
But I guess also sometimes the people that says yes to this role, of course they shouldn't have been offered it if you've done your assessment correctly. But if you will never say no to a promotion because there's pay raise involved in it, there's a profile, there's career, and I've known many people through my career I've talked with that said that they were so glad when they finally either got away from a director job and actually came down to become a senior manager again or became a product specialist. They were so relieved, and because they loved the company and they loved the product, but just that director responsibility they were just never wanted that. They wanted to pay. And if sometimes when they then moved down, I moved people down myself, and then they've been allowed to keep the pay and said, but now you're then 100% responsible for this, and therefore, we will not, chop your pay because I will not be, reasonable in a way, because you still have a huge responsibility for something else. That doesn't mean you need to manage a lot of people or a lot of clients. But I've seen so many times people been put in that position because you think that's the only way I can give them more salary or give them status in the organization.
Yeah, that's a form of miscasting that is, so common. It's practically a sport, right? Where we solve that compensation issue that way, where, we're asking that person to bring their weaknesses on center stage. And like you mentioned, they may be in that role for a very, very long time if we're not tuned into the fact that that's a bad fit. And when they find themselves out of that role, you feel that relief because they go, finally, I can get back to something that I'm exceptional at. Where, again, another clue to talent is, does somebody find intrinsic motivation in the duties of the role, and especially the difficult parts of it, right? So they not only recognize the difficult parts of the role, but they don't hesitate to take them on and they do them well. Another clue to talent. And these are all things that we, again, start to gain by using this talent matrix, because we start to look at the role in these enabling behaviors in talent in the context of real people and how they get things done. How do they get results, or can they get results? When we start to work with this as an ongoing routine, right, managers all start to now gain a clearer understanding, not only on the same page about what performance means, but they get a clear understanding of who actually fits these roles exceptionally well so that we can have, higher performing teams. When we talk about leadership roles, that is a whole different set of talents that get factored into. It's not any longer just your subject matter expertise, right? You may be the best, engineer on the planet. You may be the best marketing person, but we want to avoid putting you in that leadership role if you don't have the inherent talent to do it, because that is going to be stressful for you. It's anxiety, or you'll avoid just doing the tasks that are important. So those things get undone. And it's not lost on anybody, the fact that, Dave's a marketing genius, but boy, he doesn't do anything with his people. He doesn't build a team, right? And, you can get by with that. So many organizations get by with that. We're talking about, how do you become exceptional? How do you navigate turbulence and not be like everybody else and just take, the downfall when the market turns down? Or how do you capture the up without getting to chaos, right? How do you grow gracefully without it becoming chaotic? You've got to have great leadership and the right people in all the right seats. And leaders is where you start, right? If you don't have a strong chain of command, your ability to get the right people in the right seats and then to manage them effectively is going to be compromised. So when you ask the question of, what does it take to build a team full of the right people? You get very, very clear on what is great leadership. And that gets factored into your assessment of the who's that you have leading. And again, we apply that through the talent matrix, just like we would an engineering role or, an administrative role or any other frontline role. That's its own talent matrix. Is what is this person like as a leader? Do they fit the role?
And I guess what's very interesting when you talk about there, and I don't know, that's how I'm getting as well, is that you have your strategy, you have your vision, you have your beliefs and values, and you make sure that all that is connected around the roles to make sure they deliver up to those, because that's in principle the direction the company wants to go, and therefore the behavior you want to see in these roles. You start to become very, very clear on that, which often is missed in strategy work, is that what kind of behavior do we need to see then from our people to make that happen? Not the goals, but what kind of behavior do we need to achieve the goals?
Yeah, how do you get an organization that will achieve without this idea again of change management? Remember the good to great companies invested no time in change management. And that is such a mind bender for most people to go, how on earth did they get things done? Now, and they faced as much adversity as anybody else did. It's just how the fact that they went to the trouble to have the right people, and the right people are not only self-motivated, they are willing to put the greater interest, whatever that mission is, over a parochial, a departmental interest, right? They're sort of the definition of the people that will invest to get to collective success. And that's why you can get this kind of organization that is very, very closely aligned but loosely coupled. It doesn't need tight management. It's only possible with the right people. And like I said, this talent matrix allows us to, one, begin the idea of assessing our people, and then we introduce it as a routine where it is looked at role by role 3 to 4 times a year. And this is where we bring managers together to share their insights on the people that are in specific roles. We call this a live session where there's discussion amongst managers who either have people in that role or are familiar with that role. This is all performance and potential discussions. And the great part about this is that by doing this routine, right, you finally get a shared understanding of what performance and potential and talent looks like, where most organizations, every manager is managing in a silo, right? They're managing just on their own with their own perspectives. And this idea of bringing folks together, starts to generate a calibration around, how do we manage performance? How do we select the right people? And you get consistency and clarity. And that's what people want. Most people want the idea to go, man, I wish we were just consistent on how we manage performance and we knew what the standards were. And it comes out of this. The other thing that happens when we go through this routine is the idea of being able to be very objective and professional about making these sort of sharing these insights about people. You're getting good at having difficult conversations and feedback and doing it in a professional, productive way. You're building trust across your management team that spills out of that room into the other work they do. So feedback becomes normal. We get calibrated on what we think of performance and potential. And we have high levels of trust. And managers now become better at their jobs because they're kind of a mutual support group, right? They kind of hold each other accountable. And each of them are going to have some of the same issues to deal with in giving somebody feedback. And when they do that as a group, they get better at it. It's like training like a team, right? And Michael, this is one of the things that I've emphasized with a lot of leaders lately is we use sports analogies all the time. And when you watch elite athletes, right, they spend hours training on fundamentals. They watch film. They look at their performances and they break them down. They get coaching, right? They spend this massive amount of effort and then they compete in a very small portion of their time. Of course, they scrimmage and do things like that. But there's so much in the work that they do to become excellent. But what do we do with managers? We expect them to roll the ball out there every day without any kind of training, without any kind of development, without practicing, without working on fundamentals. And we wonder why we don't have exceptional leadership teams. It's kind of crazy. Not that the proportion of time would flip to what an elite athlete has, but my Lord, the fact that we literally invest so little in leadership for the most part, in that kind of training and development, that's something that we have to change if we really want to have a great organization. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well because especially we just gone through with the pandemic, some very turbulent time, and there was, everybody threw everything out of they had in their hands and just focusing on getting the ship sailing. And I feel a bit we've been in that situation, and actually it's really about what you say now as well. Actually, just look up and make sure you're actually training the fundamentals as we go into potentially even more on uncertainty. What is in your view and the leaders you work with, how they're seeing the future and the uncertainty that come ahead? Because I guess that's why they come to you as well. They want to navigate that better.
Yeah, I think for the most part, and you mentioned it, the pandemic has created, sort of this higher pressure, more volatile environment where leaders really are now having more and more questions about how do I get control in an environment that's sort of out of control, and they looking for answers. Again, they go, these principles, can they offer me an answer? And again, the idea that the potential of an organization is defined by the caliber of your talent and your ability to get the full potential out. That is a leadership function. And so that's what they come looking for. How do I do that and get the support the growth that I need? How do I get that and not have the organization be so difficult to manage because it's stressful on the leader? And so, we really begin by stepping back and allowing them to step out of that fray and focus on, getting clear on what the brutal facts are. Again, you've got to look at the talent that you have, and that's with your leadership team. And do you have what's that percentage of the right people in the right seats? And we begin to work by assessing, how strong are we in those areas? How strong are we leading in line with level 5? How strong is our fit in all of our key roles? And how well can this organization respond to the difficulties as we go? If we anchor down in these build-up areas, we have a chance to see through almost anything. When you have an organization that doesn't have a high level and you're managing very traditionally, all that pressure and all the ability to respond to all the difficulties you're going to face falls on the leader. And that's just impossible for anybody to do effectively. So,
Dave, if you wanted to give like an advice to leaders out there, they already believe that they need to go and do this work. They are on the journey. They may be flatlined a bit, as I told you earlier, that I found myself sometimes in trying to practice good to great. You flatline at some points, and you think, I can't. How do I actually get the full potential out of that? What would your advice be to these people, because they know they need to do something. There's this storm around the corner, and I need to do something. I need to shake up things for the better.
Yeah, I would say, if one, I think you have to go back to, reading the book and understanding the principles, but in a very practiced way. This is the difference between, and I run into a lot of leaders who are voracious readers. They will read, they're constantly telling me about the new book that they're reading. And it's really, really different when we get into a coaching situation and we're forcing the individual to not just intellectually grasp the concepts, but to boil them back down to practice. I mean, that's definitely one of the advantages. If you can go down a coaching path where there's this forced, I've now got to put into play this idea of assessing where I'm at with my leadership, because the leader, you're the key to everything, right? The quality of your culture, the quality of your result is a reflection of the quality of your leadership. And if you want to master these principles, you're going to have to first begin with assessing yourself and where do you need to fill those gaps. And so you got to go back to it with a lens and reflect on throughout your practice, where am I most aligned with things like having the right people in the right seats? Am I dodging particularly difficult conversations, right? You've got to really look for where are the opportunities where you can improve and put new principles into practice, and then measure yourself. It's sort of this full loop to go, I'm going to take this into practice. Again, that is why so many people now come to me, is that coaching is so vital to being able to pull that off, right? It forces you to step out of the fray and to have a clear conversation, to look at your game film and go, how did I handle this situation? Where should I focus first? And then what does it mean to bring that principle into reality? And then there's an accountability. I deal with a lot of leaders that they have that situation we described earlier, where one of the biggest problems they have is this high producer that's toxic. And, in our discussions, I don't let them off the hook. That's a mandate that that's not optional to kick that can down the road. You've got to take that on. And that's where it really becomes, it's a nice read and it's, very interesting. I like the principles. Now, when you have to take action in a very difficult and important way, that's when you're getting it into practice. Some people can do that development on their own, and again, I think having a coach helps in so many ways, because it allows you to step out. And, leaders, especially at the top, most have a hard time, they've arrived. They have a hard time saying, there's gaps in my ability, my understanding in how to do these things. And again, somebody that's sort of an advocate on the outside that can help you do that. It's a safe space to do that. Allows you the freedom to become a student and to become a better leader and to build a better organization. And I think that's really, really key. However you can accomplish that, right? Whether you're able to do that on your own and self-develop, some of us had to do that over time. But getting some coaching of some kind can definitely help you. So I hope that makes sense.
It makes brilliant sense. Finding out where your gaps are, both as an organization, but also more important, the individual, and then, go back actually and either find help through people like yourself or a group, or actually start practicing, these things in real life, because you don't know what works before you put it into play. And also accept that the answer is not always a system. It's almost like there's a bit of a trial and error here as well when it comes to leadership. And often I think we expect when we read something in book, it's going to work exactly the same way in our organization. And we didn't know what context that story came out of. It can be a good to great company. It could be a GE Electric, where you hear about Jack Welch's success, but your circumstances are probably different. So you need to find your own unique way, I always say. Well, is there like one question you wish, Dave, I've asked you around, talent and what we've been around here, exploring about, performance, potential, the question about who, again, is there anything you wished I've asked you specifically?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar to the question that Collins got asked, or asked that led to Good to Great. His question was, can a good company become great, and if so, how? And we've talked a little bit about this during the podcast, Michael. But the question that I would think is important to ask is, can a good leader become great, and if so, how? And it really is about being able to, again, go back to what, identify a leadership model that that really strikes a chord with you. And of course, you and I, we talk about the level 5 leadership model, and that's what I practice. But if it's not that, then find something that really does connect with you as the kind of leader that you want to become. And then start that journey of investing a lot of effort into getting clear and humble on where you're at. What are the gaps? Again, this idea of going back and reading Good to Great with the purpose and intention of putting it into practice. It is so much more rigorous and challenging than just reading it several times and just intellectually grasping them. It's a matter of now going, these are the situations where I need to be better at leading with questions. Okay, I'm going to diagram these are the certain meetings or the events or the results that I want to get through leading with more questions. Right? I want to get more of the truth out on the stage, or I want to get this problem solved by leading with questions, and put it into play, and then see how well you do it and keep that cycle going. That's the only way you can ever excel at something, is to be intentional, deliberate in your practice, study, review, and then repeat the cycle until you get mastery. The idea that having someone help you as a coach can speed that process up is certainly helpful. Again, regardless of what leadership model you decide to pursue, I'm a real big advocate in having that kind of intention around building leaders, right? Again, we've got to get to the point where getting the right people in the right seats begins with building great leaders down the food chain. And the best way to do that is to start with yourself. When the top leader invests that way and humbles themselves to get feedback and to get better, then everybody else goes, well, it's not just about fixing me. He or she was willing to start the process and become a better leader themselves. No better way than to lead by example. And that's why I start with people at the top of whatever organization wants to go down this path. They have to look in the mirror and start the process. So it's not just about fixing everybody else. So
that was a great question, actually, because it's such a complex one as well. But again, I love what you said. Go and find your part in the book. And I think level 5 probably is a very good place to start right now. Because I was just looking at it the other day, and every time you look at that model, you get something new out of it, and you actually start to think about the people you work with and start to place them, even if they don't have a leadership position. Where are they there, and why are they ended there, and how can we move them out of that? Because that will be your first intention. How do we move them up the chain to level 5? So where can people go and find out more about you and connect with you, Dave, if they thought that was quite interesting? I definitely want to know more about what Dave is up to. You put a lot of great stuff out on LinkedIn, I know.
Yeah, LinkedIn is really my primary site where I share a lot of content, both on my personal page and my business page. My business page is Lead Different. And I'm also the owner of the Good to Great discussion group, where we share content that is aimed at helping everybody who's read and connected with any of Colin's work, really. How do we bring it into practice? And I share a lot of content that is very, very specific in the black boxes that we open. You'll see a lot on this talent matrix on there. You'll see a lot on the right versus tight management of the right people, because again, it's full cycle. And so LinkedIn is definitely the right place to find me. Of course, if they're fans of your podcast, you and I are very well connected. So that's another way for sure.
Good. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming back and talking about the book I love, and I know a lot of the people that's tuning in is also a big fan of the book Good to Great, but also Jim Collins' work, and actually how to put that into practice when it comes to talent.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much, Dave, for your deep dive into the talent matrix and for sharing your learnings, working with CEOs, building great organizations. Now ask yourself, what can we do to boost our talent pipeline? And if you want to learn more about Dave and his work, tune in to episode number 141 with Dave Oakley on Going From Good to Great. A big thank you to BizSimply for supporting us, bringing great insights, strategies and tools to help leaders to become better every day. Check them out at bizsimply.com or on their social at BizSimply or BizSimplyHQ. You can also email them directly at podcast@bizsimply.com. A massive thank you to Fina Charlton, who is the show producer and editor from the Podcast Collective. I really appreciate that you are spending your time and listening in. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, please share, rate, review, or subscribe to one of our channels. It all helps. Which all can be done via the website, hospitalitymavericks.com. And if you have any feedback for the show or other thoughts, reach out to me via LinkedIn or via my email, michael@hospitalitymavericks.com. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the weekly newsletter, Maverick Talk, via hospitalitymavericks.com. I'm Michael Tinkter, and you've been listening to the Hospitality Maverick podcast show. Be Maverick.